The cantina on Kepler 7 station reeked of alien sweat and cheap synthetic alcohol. Thick smoke from burning spice sticks clouded the air, making it hard to see more than a few meters ahead. The place was packed with creatures from across the galaxy, blue-skinned Vorthak traders arguing over shipping routes, massive Gorlak miners still covered in asteroid dust, and thin, ethereal scouts whispering secrets in corners. But nobody sat near the darkest corner, where the broken veteran nursed his demons alone. Velthar had claimed that corner table 3 years ago, right after the ceasefire was signed. The Krathen's forearms moved like ancient machinery, slow and deliberate, as he lifted another bottle of fermented kelp wine to his mandibles. Each movement told a story of pain. Deep scars crisscrossed his chitinous exoskeleton like a roadmap of battles fought and barely survived. His left secondary arm ended in a crude mechanical prosthetic that clicked softly with each movement, a constant reminder of what the humans had cost him. The veteran's compound eyes swept the cantina periodically, a habit that would never die. Even drunk, even broken, Velthar remained alert. The war had burned that instinct so deep into his brain that sleep came only with the help of enough alcohol to kill a lesser species. Tonight felt different, though. Tonight, a young Krathen cadet had entered the cantina, his pristine blue uniform, marking him as fresh from the military academy on Krathen Prime. The youngster's armor gleamed under the cantina's harsh lights, unmarked by battle, untested by real combat. His movements were quick and confident, the kind of confidence that came from simulation training and classroom theory. The cadet had been asking questions around the cantina for the past hour, buying drinks for anyone willing to talk about the human war. Most of the aliens turned away or changed the subject. Some species didn't even acknowledge the war had happened, preferring to pretend those 5 years of hell were just a bad dream. But eventually, inevitably, someone pointed the cadet toward Velthar's corner. The young Krathen approached slowly, his secondary arms fidgeting with his belt buckle. "Sir, aren't you Commander Velthar from the human front?" Velthar's compound eyes focused on the youngster, with the mechanical precision of a targeting system. The veteran's mandibles clicked once, twice, processing the question. "That was a long time ago, cadet." The young soldier's posture straightened with excitement. "Please, sir, they don't teach us about the war at the academy. All our instructors were too young to serve. But I've heard stories." His voice dropped to an eager whisper. "Tell me about the glory, about how we crushed those soft-skinned primitives. Tell me how the mighty coalition showed those upstart humans their place in the galaxy." For a moment, Velthar just stared at the cadet. Then a harsh clicking sound escaped his throat. Laughter, but bitter and cold as space itself. The sound made nearby aliens look up nervously from their drinks. They knew that laugh. It was the sound of someone who had seen too much, survived too much, lost too much. "Glory?" Velthar's prosthetic arm clicked against the metal table. "Sit down, young one. Let me tell you about the humans. Let me tell you why half the galaxy's species sleep with weapons under their beds, even now, 5 years after the ceasefire." The cadet's enthusiasm faltered at the veteran's tone, but his curiosity was stronger than his fear. He pulled out a chair and sat down, leaning forward eagerly. Around them, the cantina's noise seemed to fade as other aliens unconsciously moved away from their table. Velthar took a long drink from his bottle, feeling the familiar burn of the alcohol. "It started simply enough," he began, his voice carrying the weight of memory. First contact with Earth happened when they were still confined to their home system. 1 star, 8 planets, barely a handful of space stations. Primitive chemical rockets that took months to travel between their own worlds. Basic nuclear technology that was impressive only by the standards of a species that had just learned to split atoms. The veteran's eyes grew distant, looking past the cadet toward something only he could see. "Our xenobiologists spent 3 months studying them before we made official contact. The reports were laughable. They classified humans as soft-tissue bipeds with limited military applications. No natural armor like our exoskeletons, no claws like the Vorthak, no venom sacs like the ethereals, no telepathic abilities like the Mindcasters, just pink skin, and fragile bones that broke if you looked at them wrong." He paused to drink deeply, and when he continued, his voice was quieter. The Coalition High Command saw the reports and made their decision. Earth would be the perfect first conquest for our new expansion policy. An easy victory to boost morale and demonstrate Coalition superiority. The humans would provide a good source of manual labor, assuming any survived the occupation. The cadets' mandibles clicked with anticipation. So we attacked. Oh, we attacked, Velthar said, his prosthetic clicking faster now. The finest fleet in Coalition history. 12 dreadnoughts, 40 cruisers, over 200 support vessels. We had warriors from 15 different species, all eager to prove their worth against these primitive humans. The veteran's voice dropped to almost a whisper. We were so very wrong. The Coalition's first mistake was underestimating human adaptability. Velthar continued, his voice growing distant as memories flooded back. The cantina around them seemed to fade away as the veteran's compound eyes stared into the past. I was part of the initial invasion force that hit their colony world of New Busan. Just a small farming settlement on the edge of human space, maybe 12,000 colonists total, mostly farmers growing modified crops and miners extracting rare minerals from the planet's crust. The veteran's prosthetic arm clicked rhythmically against the metal table, keeping time like a mechanical heartbeat. Command briefed us that it would be a simple operation. Drop in fast, secure the settlement, process the humans for relocation. They estimated resistance would last maybe 6 hours before complete surrender. After all, what could farmers and miners do against the most advanced military force in the galaxy? Velthar's mandibles clicked in what might have been bitter amusement. The dropships came down at dawn, their engines screaming through New Busan's thin atmosphere. 12 assault craft loaded with Krathan shock troops, Vorthak heavy weapons, specialists and Gorlak siege engineers. We had plasma cannons, energy shields, gravity manipulators. The humans had farming tools and mining equipment. The cadet leaned closer, eager for details of Coalition victory. But something in the veteran's tone suggested this story wouldn't end the way the young soldier expected. The humans had a mining engineer named Dae Ho, Velthar continued, mid-40s. By their standards, worked the deep tunnels extracting crystalline formations. When our dropships appeared on his seismic sensors, he didn't run like the others. He didn't hide in the emergency shelters or try to flee into the wilderness. The veteran paused to take another drink, his organic arms trembling slightly. Instead, he went to the mining supply depot and started working. 3 hours, cadet. While our forces were establishing a perimeter and setting up command posts, this one human spent 3 hours modifying industrial mining charges into anti-aircraft weapons. Velthar's eyes grew darker as he remembered. Dae Ho understood explosives better than our own demolition experts. He took simple chemical charges designed to crack rock and turned them into guided missiles using the colony's communication satellites for targeting data. By the time we realized what was happening, we'd lost 6 gunships to improvised explosives made from fertilizer and scrap metal. The prosthetic clicked faster now, betraying the veteran's agitation. But that wasn't even the scary part. The scary part was watching him work. Cool, methodical, like he was solving an engineering problem instead of fighting for his life. He studied our flight patterns for 15 minutes, calculated our approach vectors, then placed his charges exactly where they'd do maximum damage. Around them, the cantina had grown quieter as other aliens unconsciously strained to hear the veteran's words. Stories from the human war were rare, and most who had fought there preferred not to speak of it. The first explosion took out our lead gunship completely, Velthar continued. Vaporized it mid-flight. The second and third charges damaged our escorts, forcing them to make emergency landings. But Dae Ho wasn't finished. He had rigged the E, mining tunnels with more explosives, turning the entire settlement into a trap. The cadet's breathing had quickened. But surely our ground forces walked into a maze, Velthar interrupted. Every tunnel, every building, every piece of equipment had been turned into a weapon. The humans used their own infrastructure against us. Mining robots became remote-controlled bombs. Agricultural sprayers dispensed corrosive chemicals that ate through our armor. Even their children's toys had been converted into surveillance. Drones? Velthar's voice grew quieter, more dangerous. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was how they learned. Every tactic we used, Every weapon we deployed, every piece of technology we brought to that planet, they studied it like scientists examining specimens. Within hours, they had figured out how our energy weapons worked. Within days, they were building their own versions using spare parts from farming equipment. The veteran's prosthetic clicked against the table as he gestured. They took our plasma rifles and jury-rigged them to their primitive power sources, turned our communication equipment into jamming devices, used our own medical scanners to identify weak points in our armor and physiology. The cadet leaned forward, his mandibles clicking nervously. But surely our superior technology gave us the advantage. Superior? Velthar's mandibles spread in what might have been a smile, but there was no humor in it. Let me tell you about so young a human medical student who was working at the colony's small hospital when we invaded. The veteran's voice dropped, forcing the cadet to lean even closer. She was just 23 years old by human standards, barely an adult. Still learning basic medicine, had never even seen combat before. When we captured the hospital on day 2 of the occupation, she was working in the emergency ward, treating wounded colonists. Velthar paused, his compound eyes reflecting the cantina's dim lights. 3 days later, she had figured out how to reprogram our medical nanites. These were the most advanced healing technology in the galaxy, microscopic robots designed to repair tissue damage and fight infection. It should have been impossible for a primitive human to understand them, let alone modify them. The prosthetic clicked faster now, like an accelerating countdown. But So Young didn't just understand them. She improved them. Instead of healing damaged tissue, her reprogrammed nanites began consuming organic matter from the inside out. They would enter through the smallest cut or scratch, then systematically devour their host while leaving no external signs of infection. The cadet's breathing had become shallow. That's not possible. She tested it on our wounded first, Velthar whispered, his voice barely audible above the cantina's background noise. Coalition soldiers who had been brought to the hospital for treatment. We thought they were dying from their injuries, but they were actually being eaten alive by microscopic machines that had been turned into weapons by a human medical student. The veteran's organic arms trembled as he lifted his bottle. Then she released them into the water supply. The turning point came during what we called the soul incident, Velthar said, his forearms trembling slightly as he reached for another bottle. The veteran's compound eyes had taken on a haunted quality, like someone staring into an abyss that stared back. By then, we had been fighting on Earth for 8 months. What started as a quick conquest had turned into a grinding, urban warfare nightmare. The cantina's noise faded as other patrons unconsciously moved away from their table, sensing the darkness in the veteran's tale. Even the holographic dancers seemed dimmer, their colors muted by the weight of memory that hung in the air around Velthar, like a toxic cloud. Sol was supposed to be our staging ground for the final assault on Earth's capital, the veteran continued, his voice growing more mechanical with each word. The city had been bombed flat, its skyscrapers reduced to twisted metal and concrete. But the humans had built an entire network of tunnels and bunkers beneath the ruins, like insects burrowing into the planet's crust. Velthar's prosthetic clicked against his bottle as he struggled to maintain his grip. We had cornered a group of human civilians in one of these underground complexes. Intelligence reports said there were maybe 50 humans down there, mostly families who had been hiding since the initial bombardment. Women, elderly, children, non-combatants by any civilized standard of warfare. The cadet leaned forward, expecting to hear about coalition mercy or proper treatment of prisoners. But the veteran's next words shattered those expectations. Among them was a human named Taimin, barely out of adolescence by their standards. Maybe 19 or 20 years old, with the kind of soft features that marked him as someone who had never seen real violence before the war started. Velthar's mandibles clicked rhythmically. He had been studying what humans call biochemistry at one of their learning institutions before the invasion began. The veteran paused to drink, his organic arms shaking with the effort. When we finally breached the bunker after a 3-day siege, we expected to find terrified civilians begging for mercy. Instead, we found a fully functional chemical weapons laboratory built from household supplies. Velthar's compound eyes focused on something beyond the cantina walls, seeing scenes that existed only in his memory. Taimin had spent weeks down in that bunker, working by the light of emergency power cells. He had taken simple cleaning supplies, soap, bleach, insecticides, drain cleaners, and modified them into weaponized chemical compounds that could kill a Krathan warrior in seconds. The prosthetic clicked faster now, betraying the veteran's growing agitation. But that wasn't the innovative part, Cadet. Any chemist with basic knowledge could create poison from cleaning supplies. What made Taimin special was his delivery system. Around them, the cantina had fallen almost silent. Even the alien bartender had stopped polishing glasses to listen to the veteran's tale. The innovative part was how he delivered these compounds. Velthar continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. He had trained the human younglings, their children, to release these chemicals through the bunker's ventilation systems. Children as young as 8 or 9 years old, crawling through air ducts with containers of death strapped to their backs. Baifi. Young Krathan's mandibles clicked in disbelief. That's impossible. No species would sacrifice their own offspring. The parental bonding instincts alone would prevent— That's what we thought too, Velthar interrupted, his voice sharp. Gaza plasma blade. Every species in the galaxy protects their young. It's the most basic survival instinct, programmed into our genetic code by millions of years of evolution. But humans don't think like other species. The veteran's prosthetic arm gestured weakly toward the cantina's ceiling. Those children weren't being sacrificed, Cadet. They were volunteering. 8- and 9-year-old humans, old enough to understand that they were going to die, choosing to become weapons, because it meant their deaths might save other humans. Velthar's voice cracked slightly. We found recordings that Taimin had made during the training sessions. He explained to each child exactly what the chemicals would do, how the delivery system worked, what would happen when coalition forces breached their hiding spots. And every single one of them said yes. The cadet's breathing had become rapid and shallow. But surely when you discovered the plot— We discovered it when our soldiers started dying, the veteran cut him off. Kratha warriors found dead in their sleep, killed by toxins that attacked our respiratory systems. Vorthak heavy troopers collapsing mid-patrol as chemicals ate through their exoskeletons from the inside. Gorlak engineers dying in agony as their nervous systems shut down one synapse at a time. Velthar lifted his bottle with trembling arms. It took us 2 days to realize what was happening, 2 days of watching our soldiers die in ways that should have been impossible. The humans had studied our physiology, learned exactly which chemicals would be most effective against each species in our coalition. The prosthetic clicked steadily now, like a countdown timer ticking towards 0. But that wasn't even the worst discovery. The worst part came when we started finding the laboratories. The veteran's compound eyes reflected the cantina's dim lights, showing depths of horror that the young cadet was only beginning to understand. The humans didn't just fight us, Cadet. They studied us like we were specimens in some cosmic experiment. They captured our soldiers alive and dissected them, learning our anatomy so they could kill us more efficiently. Velthar's voice dropped to a whisper that seemed to suck the warmth from the air around their table. In the bunker beneath Sol, we found detailed diagrams of Krathan internal organs, charts showing Vorthak nerve clusters, models of Gorlak brain structures made from clay and wire, all labeled in human writing, all annotated with notes about vulnerabilities and weak points. The cadet's mandibles clicked frantically. Medical research, trying to understand us for treatment purposes. No, Velthar said, his voice hollow as deep space. They called it research. But it wasn't about healing. Every diagram was marked with the most efficient ways to cause pain, to induce organ failure, to trigger system collapse. They had turned the science of life into the art of death. The veteran's prosthetic clicked one final time against the table. And Taimin, that 19-year-old biochemistry student, had taught it all to children. By the second year of the HFY War, everything had changed, Velthar continued, his voice taking on the hollow quality of someone recounting a nightmare that refused to end. The veteran's compound eyes stared past the cadet, seeing ghost ships and burning stations in the cantina's smoky air. The humans weren't fighting like prey anymore. They had become something else entirely, something that hunted with calculated precision. The cantina around them had grown unnaturally quiet. Even the background hum of life support systems seemed muted, as if the station itself was holding its breath to hear the veteran's tale. The Coalition High Command had established Proxima Station as our primary staging ground for the Earth campaign, Velthar explained, his prosthetic clicking rhythmically against the table. It was a massive orbital fortress, bigger than most. Moons with enough firepower to crack a planet's crust. 50,000 Coalition personnel called it home. Krathan officers, Vorthak engineers, Gorlak heavy infantry, ethereal intelligence operatives. The finest minds and strongest warriors from 15 different species. The veteran paused to drain his bottle, his organic arms trembling with the effort. We thought it was impregnable. Energy shields that could deflect asteroid impacts. Quantum-encrypted communication networks that even the ethereals couldn't crack. Automated defense systems with targeting computers faster than thought itself. Velthar's mandibles clicked in bitter amusement. The humans had reverse-engineered our technology and improved upon it in ways that should have been impossible. They took our quantum processors and made them run twice as fast. They studied our energy weapons and built versions that used half the power but delivered twice the destruction. In 2 years, they had advanced their technology by centuries. The cadet leaned forward, his pristine uniform reflecting the cantina's dim lights. But surely our experience in warfare— Experience? Velthar interrupted, his voice sharp as broken glass. Let me tell you about Hyejin, the human who led their counteroffensive against Proxima Station. She wasn't a soldier, cadet. She wasn't even military. She was what they called a software engineer, someone who wrote code for civilian computer systems before the war started. The veteran's compound eyes focused on the young soldier with laser intensity. Hyejin had spent her entire adult life designing programs for human entertainment systems. Video games, social networks, digital art platforms. She knew nothing about warfare, nothing about military tactics, nothing about the art of battle that we had perfected over millennia. Velthar's prosthetic clicked faster now, betraying his growing agitation, but she understood our quantum communication networks better than our own technicians. She looked at our most advanced military technology and saw it not as weapons of war, but as systems to be hacked, modified, turned against their creators. Around them, other aliens had stopped even pretending to mind their own business. The veteran's tale was drawing them in like gravity, pulling them toward a story they both wanted and feared to hear. The attack began without warning, Velthar continued, his voice growing more mechanical with each word. No ships, no missiles, no traditional assault, just a single data transmission that looked like routine maintenance code. Our own systems accepted it without question, processed it through every network, every computer, every automated system on the station. The veteran's remaining organic arms gestured weakly toward the cantina's ceiling. Within minutes, everything started going wrong. Environmental controls began venting atmosphere into space. Navigation systems started calculating random jump coordinates. Weapon systems powered down just as enemy contacts appeared on our sensors. Velthar's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. But the worst part was the security system. Hyejin had uploaded a virus that rewrote the station's threat assessment protocols. Every living being was scanned, analyzed, categorized, and every non-human was classified as a hostile intruder. The cadet's breathing had become rapid and shallow. The station's own defenses turned against us, the veteran finished. Automated turrets that had protected us for years suddenly opened fire on their own crews. Security drones began hunting down Coalition personnel with ruthless efficiency. Even the station's medical systems turned deadly, injecting poison instead of medicine, releasing toxic gases instead of anesthetics. Velthar's prosthetic clicked against the table like a countdown timer. 50,000 Coalition personnel, cadet, the best and brightest from across the galaxy, engineers who had built interstellar empires, warriors who had conquered entire star systems, scientists who had unlocked the secrets of quantum mechanics and faster-than-light travel. The veteran paused, his compound eyes reflecting depths of horror that seemed to go on forever. How many survived? The cadet waited, afraid to break the silence that had fallen over their table like a funeral shroud. None. The word hung in, the air like a death sentence, final and absolute. 50,000 beings dead in 6 hours, killed by their own technology, betrayed by systems they had trusted with their lives. Velthar's voice cracked slightly. But that's not why I still have nightmares, Cadet. The nightmares don't come from the dying, they come from what happened next. The veteran lifted his new bottle with shaking arms. The humans didn't just destroy the station and move on. They didn't celebrate their victory or broadcast propaganda about their triumph. Instead, they did something that chilled me to my core. The cantina had fallen completely silent now. Even the holographic dancers had stopped moving, their frozen forms casting eerie shadows across the walls. They hunted down every escape pod, every survivor, every piece of debris that might contain living beings, Velthar whispered. Not to rescue them, not to take prisoners, to study them. The veteran's prosthetic clicked steadily, like a mechanical heartbeat counting down to something terrible. I was in communications when the station started falling apart, managed to reach an escape pod with 3 other officers, a Vorthak engineer, an ethereal navigator, and a Gorlak weapons specialist. We thought we had escaped the slaughter. Velthar's compound eyes grew distant, seeing scenes that existed only in memory. The human ships found us 12 hours later, small, fast vessels that moved like predators stalking wounded prey. They didn't demand surrender. They didn't offer terms, they just disabled our pod and brought us aboard. The cadet's mandibles clicked nervously. Prisoner processing? They dissected our communication officers while they were still alive, Velthar said, his voice hollow as deep space. Not quickly, not mercifully, methodically, scientifically, learning every detail of our physiology while asking questions about our command codes, our fleet movements, our strategic plans. The veteran's prosthetic stopped clicking. In the sudden silence, his natural breathing sounded like grinding stone. The ethereal navigator broke first, gave them access to our quantum communication protocols. The Vorthak engineer lasted longer, but eventually told them how our shield generators worked. The Gorlak never broke at all, died with our weapons. Specifications still locked in his brain. Velthar's voice became almost inaudible. Then they used those codes to lure more coalition ships into traps. They had learned to think like us, to predict our moves, to anticipate our strategies. They sent fake distress calls, using our own communication systems, broadcast false intelligence, using our command frequencies. Every ship that responded was destroyed or captured. The veteran's compound eyes focused on the cadet with terrible intensity. But we could never predict them, Cadet, never anticipate their next move, because they didn't think like warriors or conquerors or any other species in the galaxy. They thought like something that had evolved beyond the need for civilization, beyond the constraints of mercy or honor. Velthar's prosthetic began clicking again, faster now, like an alarm counting down to disaster. They had become pure predators, and we were just prey wearing fancy uniforms. The Coalition's final mistake was deciding to attack Earth directly, Velthar said, his voice barely audible now, like wind through a graveyard. The veteran's forearms had grown still, no longer trembling with memory or alcohol. Around them, the cantina had become a tomb of silence, every alien patron frozen in place as they listened to the conclusion of a story that would haunt their dreams. The veteran's prosthetic arm had stopped clicking. In the sudden quiet, his natural breathing sounded like grinding stone, each exhale carrying the weight of worlds lost and civilizations broken. By the 3rd year of the war, Coalition High Command was desperate. We had lost hundreds of ships, dozens of planets, entire fleets that simply vanished into the void, without sending so much as a distress signal. Velthar's compound eyes stared into the distance, seeing phantom fleets and burning worlds. The decision came from the very top, the Supreme Council of 15 species, meeting in emergency session on Krathon Prime. They voted unanimously to end the war with one decisive strike against Earth itself. The cadet leaned forward, his pristine uniform a stark contrast to the veteran's battle-scarred armor. A surgical strike against their military installations? No, Velthar whispered, his voice carrying the weight of genocide. Total planetary bombardment. the complete destruction of human civilization, we assembled the largest fleet in galactic history, 3,000 ships from every species in the coalition, dreadnoughts that could crack moons, carrier vessels, loaded with enough firepower to sterilize continents, support ships carrying biological weapons, designed to poison entire ecosystems. The veteran's prosthetic clicked once, a sound like breaking bones. I was assigned to the flagship Eternal Victory, a Krathan super dreadnought with enough plasma cannons to melt a planet's crust. Admiral Keithvar himself commanded the fleet, the greatest military mind in Coalition history. We jumped into Earth's solar system, expecting to find a broken species ready to surrender. Velthar paused to drink, his organic arms steady now with the calm that comes after accepting the inevitable. What we found was a fully mobilized war machine. Every asteroid belt had been converted into weapons platforms. Every moon bristled with defense satellites. The humans had turned their entire solar system into a fortress. The cantina's air recycling system hummed softly, the only sound in a room full of beings afraid to breathe too loudly. But we had numbers, firepower, the combined military might of 15 species. The bombardment began at dawn on Earth's primary continent. Plasma beams that could vaporize mountains, kinetic missiles that hit with the force of tactical nuclear weapons, biological agents that would make the planet uninhabitable for centuries. The veteran's compound eyes reflected the cantina's lights, like mirrors of hell. We killed millions of them in the first wave. Entire cities turned to glass in seconds, continents scarred by our plasma bombardments until they looked like the surface of dead worlds. The Pacific Ocean boiled from the heat of our weapons. The atmosphere itself caught fire. Velthar's voice cracked slightly. We thought we had won. Admiral Keithvar was already preparing victory broadcasts when the first human transmission reached our fleet. It came from the ruins of what had been their capital city, transmitted on an old-fashioned radio frequency that somehow cut through all our jamming. The veteran's prosthetic began clicking again, but slower now, like a funeral march. The voice belonged to a human named Ji-Hoon. He had been a teacher before the war, someone who educated human children about mathematics and literature. But when he spoke to our fleet, his voice carried the authority of someone who had seen the worst of what sentient beings could do to each other. Around them, aliens pressed closer to hear the veteran's whispered words. Even the holographic dancers had stopped moving, their frozen forms casting eerie shadows across the walls. Ji-Hoon spoke for 12 billion surviving humans when he made his declaration. Velthar continued, his voice becoming mechanical as he recited words burned into his memory. He said that Earth would not seek conquest or territory. Earth would not demand reparations or prisoner exchanges. Earth would seek only one thing, the complete extinction of every coalition species. The cadet's breathing had become shallow, rapid. But surely that was just desperation, empty threats from a dying world. They kept their promise, Velthar interrupted, his voice sharp as a plasma blade. Within 6 months, human fleets began appearing at coalition worlds. But these weren't the same ships we had fought before. These were vessels built from the wreckage of our own bombardment, powered by technologies we had never seen, crewed by humans who had watched their world burn. The veteran's prosthetic clicked steadily now, keeping time with the story of civilization's ending. Human fleets didn't capture worlds, Cadet. They sterilized them. Every planet they visited became a lifeless rock floating in space. They didn't take prisoners for interrogation. They conducted experiments on entire populations, testing new weapons, new toxins, new ways to cause suffering. Velthar's compound eyes grew distant again. I was there when they hit Vorthak Prime, watched from the observation deck of a medical ship as human vessels descended through the atmosphere like mechanical angels of death. They didn't use our weapons, didn't copy our tactics. They had created something entirely new. The cantina's light seemed to dim as the veteran continued. The humans released machines into the planet's core, devices that turned the world's own gravity against it. Vorthak Prime didn't explode or burn. It simply collapsed in on itself, crushed by its own mass until 8 billion beings were compressed into a sphere of dense matter no larger than a space station. The cadet's mandibles clicked frantically. The other worlds, surely some escaped. Every coalition world they touched became a lifeless husk, Veltar said, his voice hollow as deep space. Crathan colonies where the atmosphere was converted into corrosive acid. Gorlak mining worlds where the planet's core was turned into a weapon that destroyed everything within 3 light years. Ethereal research stations that simply vanished, leaving behind only empty space where entire systems had once existed. The veteran reached into his armor with trembling arms and withdrew a datapad, its screen cracked but still functional. This is a classified coalition intelligence report, Cadet, the last one ever filed before the ceasefire was signed. It estimates that if the humans resume their offensive, they will achieve complete galactic sterilization within 50 years. The young Crathan stared at the datapad with horror, his compound eyes reflecting the flickering data streams that spelled out the death of everything he had ever known. This can't be accurate. No species could. The ceasefire won't last forever, Veltar continued, his voice carrying the weight of prophecy. Human fleets are still out there, still building, still preparing. Every year that passes makes them stronger while we grow weaker. And when the ceasefire ends, there will be nowhere in the galaxy far enough to run. The veteran stood slowly, his movements stiff and painful, like an old machine running on its last power cell. We didn't just lose a war, youngling. We taught prey how to become apex predators. We showed them what it meant to face extinction, and they decided to teach that lesson to every other species in the galaxy. Veltar turned toward the cantina's exit, his prosthetic clicking one final time against the table. Remember this conversation, Cadet. Remember it when you're sitting in those council meetings, when older Crathan are talking about restoring coalition glory, when they start planning new campaigns against human space. The veteran paused at the cantina's entrance, his silhouette framed against the station's corridor lights. Because the humans didn't just defeat us. They didn't just win a war or conquer an enemy. He stepped into the corridor, his voice echoing, back through the cantina's doorway, like the whisper of dying stars. They evolved beyond us, and now they're coming for everything else. The cantina remained silent long after Veltar had disappeared into the station's maze of corridors. The young cadet sat alone at the table, staring at the cracked datapad with its streams of impossible numbers. Around him, aliens slowly returned to their drinks and conversations, but the laughter was forced, the voices too loud, as if they were trying to drown out the echo of truth that hung in the recycled air. In the distance, barely audible above, the station's mechanical hum, came the sound of a prosthetic arm clicking against metal walls, growing fainter with each step, until it faded entirely into the endless silence of space. The end.